Well, it's going to be an interesting day for you. And I know testing gets underway in a couple of hours, right around 2 a.m. My time. I will be back to sleep at that point, I hope. But Tim, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, we got a really cool sneak peek at Drive to Survive. And we feel very fortunate that Netflix, gave us some advanced copies on that. But, the way they handled the show this year, and I think if you're a hardcore Formula One fan, there has been backlash to this show because it's like, I brought in a whole bunch of new people who don't know anything about the sport. But that's why it's been great, right? Then the other criticism was, they've made up fake rivalries. And what struck me after watching the episodes is despite there being an absolutely historic, never seen before dominant season from one team, you see a little bit of Red Bull and Christian Horner at the beginning and nothing from Max and nothing from Sergio the rest of the way. That struck me the most, is the absence of those guys. And I know it was a conscious choice by the team and specifically by Max. I wonder, Tim, if they haven't made a huge mistake, because the series is really fantastic this year and we'll get into some of the details of it. But I just felt like I want to get your opinion on it because it does feel like they missed an opportunity. This is a well-produced, amazing series that could have changed, shifted, probably warmed up Max Verstappen's PR, and instead he kind of comes across like he's missing the party.
Yeah, it really did seem like they weren't the main focus of really much anything in this entire season of Drive to Survive. But like I'm curious to know, because I don't really have this answer, but I'm curious to know if the team just didn't allow Netflix to have as much access with Red Bull as they used to in the past, and whether or not Max wanted to, really participate. I mean, on one front, like, drivers do like their personal life to be their personal life. Like, we don't really get to see much of Fernando Alonso, even though there is a bit of an episode that's sort of dedicated to him as well. And so I think, like, on that front, I just think it's just they're just trying to like keep Netflix at bay a bit so they can just focus on trying to win championships. Which,
I mean, it makes sense. They're winning. They've got a fast car. It's crazy. I think fairly or unfairly, Max Verstappen has been, as most winners are, cast as a bit of a villain. I think Lewis Hamilton was. I think Sebastian Vettel definitely was. Schumacher was to non-Schumacher fans. So it's not like this is unheard of in this sport. But I think it really struck me. I was like, man, this is a historic year. But there was so much other drama off of the track. And there's a few episodes that I want to point out directly. Like, I think the first one that really hit me was the breakdown of what happened. I think it's a two-parter with Alpine and Otmar Szafnauer. And what's interesting about that to me, Tim, is it was actually Christian Horner's reaction to it. When he's talking to the new Alpine boss in the hallway, he's like, "Oh, you're the new guy?" And he's like, "Nice to meet you." And then he just kind of awkwardly stands there. And then they cut to an interview of him, and he's like, they're a bit of a strange animal.
Yeah, and I think like it's... Oh, you're frozen. I think I got you back. Oh, I got you.
Am I?
I lost you.
Okay, good.
There we go. Got you.
You got me? No? Great. Okay, sorry.
Where did you leave off?
I was talking about Otmar and Alpine and Christian Horner saying they're a bit of a strange, Alpine Renault are a bit of a strange animal.
Okay. They definitely are. I mean, I think when we kind of look at how that team is put together, and, it's something we've talked about, you have a team that's located in France building engines, and then you've got another team that's located in the UK building a race car. And so trying to marry those two things together, very difficult thing to do. And so when you look at it, it's kind of like you don't have everything under one roof, which is what you really want for a Formula One team. You want to try and have everything under one roof now to make things way more easier and streamlined. But I think for the team and for Otmar, I think he was really put in a difficult position, Adam, like just trying to run that team and essentially be the fall guy.
Well, yeah, and he'd been there. I mean, over the course of his tenure, if you just look at it from the outside, you'd see that he lost Fernando Alonso. You'd see that he lost Oscar Piastri. Now, Pierre Gasly is no slouch, but he's not Fernando Alonso. And then they don't have that amazing third driver who is now kicking their butts over at McLaren, right? So that doesn't look good. And then they started last year and they had the double collision, I think, in Australia, and they had two DNFs in a row, double DNFs in a row, brutal. But when you go behind the scenes, was it not the Renault Alpine board that said, well, we can't offer Fernando a 2-year deal? And I do believe that the Oscar Piastri contract was signed before Otmar got there, and Alpine's head of legal, and this is crazy because I looked this up on on LinkedIn, Tim, when it happened. Their head of legal was removed a couple of months after Piastri signed with McLaren. Not kidding. I kept an eye on it. I was like, that's something that their legal person should know. And I noticed the job change, and that wasn't really widely reported, but she was taken out. So, or at least she was moved on, or she resigned, or whatever you want to call it. She's not there anymore. And I feel like it wasn't enough time for that to be his fault. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think when I say, fall guy, that's one of the things that I bring up, a lot is that Fernando Alonso contract renewal with Alpine, and the power struggle behind the scenes of trying to kind of get Fernando re-signed with Alpine. And I think Otmar is given instruction, to maybe only give Fernando 1 year because Laurent Mekies may not believe that he's good enough for another year. Maybe when he gets a little older, he's going to slow down. And I think that was the fear from Laurent Rossi. I called him Laurent Mekies. Laurent Rossi from behind the scenes. And
that's right, Laurent Rossi.
I think like that's a huge part of all this. And I think like when we look at the episode, they do a good job of kind of like showing sort of the downfall of the team, but at the same time, there are other reasons as to why, Otmar, got let go. And one of the reasons is that Renault and Alpine, they wanted to have this team being more competitive sooner and faster, streamlined faster. And you can't do it when you've got two separate factories. And I think that was one of the things for Otmar. It was trying to convince them that, hey, we need to put everything under one roof. And this is going to take a long time because we're so separated.
Has that been worked on since? Like, are they moving towards moving them all to Enstone or moving them all to France?
No. Nothing.
Really?
Not. Yeah, like they haven't.
Okay, all right.
They haven't. It's not really like. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
You know what these teams, man? Like it's always a challenge to try and help a team help themselves. And sometimes when you have big owners, like a big ownership group like Renault is, you tend, Adam, to have too many cooks in the kitchen. Well,
one team that I think can be accused of just that, huge brand, probably the world's most recognizable car brand, that's Ferrari. The conversation in the whole episode around Fred Vasseur taking over and the rivalry and the danger that Leclerc and Sainz put themselves in. I'd almost forgotten Monza last year, how eventful it was and how disappointing it was when Red Bull pulled ahead with just a few laps to go. Like, it was like, how could you not get excited or romantic about a Ferrari win at Monza? Like and we had the McLaren win at Monza a couple years ago. It seems to be a track where special things happen. But Carlos specifically, watching him go out and win the Singapore Grand Prix after that in the series and what that meant for the team and him and Charles coming together, it's just interesting now viewing it through the lens of he's being replaced by Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah. Episode 6, leap of faith. Oh yeah, for sure. I loved that episode. I loved it. That was my favorite episode in this entire season. I loved how they filmed the locals. I love how they went to coffee shops and they basically just got audio of people being like, yes, Ferrari. And the other people saying like, F Ferrari. Like, what are we doing? We're bringing in a guy from France
or
to run our
who's
team.
This Fred Vasseur? Yeah.
It was that was my favorite episode. They did a great job with it. It for me, best episode of the season. And I think for basically, if you're going to tell sort of that true sort of storyline and story arc of a team throughout a season, that's that episode. And they nailed it on all points, right? Like if we go back and we talk about the 2 Alpine episodes, it was like, well, I mean, there are a couple things they kind of did leave out, but for this particular episode with Ferrari, they really captured the true thing from start to finish, and they did a great job, and it shows.
It does. And it's interesting the way they handled this season, and they've handled a lot of seasons like this. When it started, it was a lot more of a narrative storyline of like 3 teams, right? You had Haas, you had Red Bull, and those were sort of the 2 big ones in the first season. Gunther Steiner's coming out party and Daniel Ricciardo's big decision. That was season 1, right? That was the really big sort of crux of the whole thing, and they followed that and followed that and followed that. As the show's gotten bigger and it's had to incorporate all the teams to varying degrees, Sauber's never involved. They never take part. Like Bottas and Zhou Guanyu are not in this very much. But I think it's interesting looking at the way they handled this year, because there were defined storylines outside of Max Verstappen. So maybe it's a good thing that Max is, they want to focus on championships, because you had the McLaren storyline where they're starting at the back, and then everybody knows what happened. They got better and better and better, and they were regularly on podiums by the end of the year. And having Claire Williams come in and talk about just how rare that is. Like, you show up and your car is bad, and you almost feel like, oh my God, I'm gonna be stuck in purgatory for the rest of the year. And Zach Brown having to deal with the sponsors and getting that on camera. The guy who heads up Google's marketing division going, you better give us some better results, man. The pressure that you feel for Zach in that moment, it's like, wow. And I love the way, so they kind of chop it up and handle it. I also want to say this, viewing the Lewis Hamilton Mercedes story through a lens of, we know that Lewis ended up at Ferrari, and his relationship with Toto and everything that's gone on there. What an episode that was, like, actually gripping.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it was really good. And it didn't seem staged when they did some of their sit down and chats. I mean, I think though the only thing that really seemed staged in like the Mercedes episode in particular, the only thing for me that felt like it was really staged was when Toto and Lewis were sitting down in where were they? So they were sitting down in
his
Toto's office, in a motorhome. And that episode 6, that was leap of faith. I think I screwed up the Ferrari episode. I think it was what was a Ferrari episode? Forza Ferrari episode 8. So my bad, everybody who's listening.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Episode 6 was the Hamilton one, and I really enjoyed it. I liked it. I liked the behind the scenes stuff. I liked when George and he were driving around the Mercedes Project 1 car, and the film crew telling Lewis to kind of come back. Like, we need to get you ready for this shoot.
That was great.
And Lewis like wanting to like get going, like, come on guys, this is taking way too long. Like, I've got a lot of stuff to do. So I think like in that aspect, like it gave us a good glimpse into like, what these guys are like, what that team dynamic is like, what that relationship between George and Lewis is like. But I would say, Adam, like to go back to McLaren, episode 3, I believe it was called Under Pressure. That was that was one of my favorite episodes as well. And like you said, when, Zach's sort of sitting down and talking with like the folks from, Google and some of the other sponsors that he had at that table, like that was a real conversation. Like they actually mic'd them all up and they, obviously they removed some things that they really didn't want us to see. But for the most part, like that was like a real sit down chat conversation, meet and greet dinner sort of thing going on there. And there were real conversations happening there. And it was great, man. I really liked that episode. I liked how they did a great job of showing that relationship between Zach Brown and Lando Norris. And I think one of the most important things that, this team, or Netflix, I should say, did, or Box to Box Films, was string together the entire season of relationships. Every episode was a relationship to each other in some form or fashion. I mean, there were a couple episodes that were just not very good, but there were some really great stuff because of that relationship sort of focus. And I thought like they did a great job of nailing that because, behind the scenes, a big part of Formula One, Adam, is relationships.
Oh, yeah, any business. But I mean, Formula One that's all they do is talk. The walls talk in Formula One. That's why there's so many rumors floating around.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And that's why I really like that episode as well. And I don't know. I don't even know what your favorite episodes are. Like I haven't even asked you yet.
Obviously, the McLaren one was great. Yeah. But I'll tell you, Tim, the insight into what happened with Daniel Ricciardo and hearing you talk about how he was on the track today, or yesterday now, because it's 12:18 here. Hearing about how strong he was as a driver, when you see Christian say to him, and I remember you texted me this, right around the time we were about to find out about Nick DeVries. You text messaged me something along the lines of his number, his time at Silverstone would have put him on the front row with Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
And I remember being shocked by that, not because I didn't think Daniel was a good driver, but because I didn't realize the amount of progress he'd made to get back to himself over that 6-month period. And seeing Christian say that to him, I mean, the Nick DeVries thing seemed unfair. It seemed at the time like, man, you just gave this guy no time to get started. That's how the team operates. But what was Christian Horner really going to do? You've got a guy who, if you put him in the Red Bull car on a one lap, can put himself next to Max Verstappen. What are you supposed to do? Let him sit? You kind of have to make that. It's like, this is Formula One. Is there a better driver? Then that's our guy, especially a guy that knows their system so well.
Yeah, 100%. I think, when you kind of look how that whole thing sort of played out and went down. I mean, I think for Ricciardo, having the time off was important to him, and he does make mention to that. And it was sort of recharging the batteries for him, because I did talk to him throughout that season last year. Like there were points where he and I actually like sat down. Like I know we had Daniel on our podcast when we were in Mexico, but way before that, like I was sitting down with Daniel back in like Miami. So in May of that season, and he would look like a different guy just because he'd had some time away from everything. And they did a good job in kind of showing that, but they could have showed it a little bit more, because having that time removed from Formula One gives you a different perspective when you come back, especially as an athlete, and especially as an athlete like Daniel Ricciardo. Like he was a different guy when I saw him at the end of 2022 and spoken to him. And then when I saw him again in the May of 2023, and then when I saw him again throughout that season, he was a different guy as that season sort of rolled along. You could just tell that he had been refreshed. He looked good, and he looked in good spirits. And that set him up nicely, I think, for this season that we're coming into now, 2024, to compete in and do well at, which he thinks he's going to. I didn't like the fact that they didn't show us much Nick DeVries. Like we were kind of promised like a bit of a Nick DeVries story, and we never really got that. And it's kind of like, okay, well, don't put something out there if you're not going to show it to us, because a lot of folks may not know. Like, if you
we got him cleaning his apartment.
Yeah, that's it. Like, if you go back to like 2022, like he's put into the Williams in Monza, and those two Williams cars, they weren't the same. Like, Nicholas Latifi and Nick DeVries didn't, have the same stuff. I mean, Alex was always getting the better equipment, and, Nick was put in the car at the right spot at the right moment and in the right set of circumstances. And you've got Christian Horner, down at Red Bull, and they see what he's doing, and they need another driver to fill in over at AlphaTauri, and they bring Nick over, and they don't really show all of what happened with him there. And that's got me curious as to, why not? Because that was a big story out in the middle of the season.
It absolutely was. Well, listen, Tim, I think, we can't give away too much about Drive to Survive, but it's a pretty spectacular season. The drama is amazing. And that's the great thing about Formula One is the drama is amazing, and it continued after the season was done. And, we're looking at Lewis Hamilton's last year with Mercedes. We're looking at, does Daniel Ricciardo come in and get to the Red Bull big team? There's so many things to talk about. I know you got to get to the track, so I'll let you get showered up and go, my friend. Enjoy. We'll be watching on social media. Very jealous of you. And enjoy the hot weather too. It's not bad in Toronto, but it's not Bahrain.
No, I mean, like, dude, actually, like, it's nice when you're in the sun here, but dude, once the sun goes down, I was in my jacket and pants, bro. Like, it wasn't, Adam, it was kind of cold here last night. I'm not kidding. It was.